Welcome to the deep dive. We're diving straight into some pretty critical material you sent us today.
Yeah, stuff focusing on the National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics.
Specifically Article 10 to 5.
And this isn't just, some dry academic topic. It's very much a live discussion.
Sometimes quite heated, I gather?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right now in the real estate world, there's a lot of talk around potential changes to 10 to 5. And some recent controversies have really pushed it into the spotlight.
Right. So think of this as our chance to really unpack it for you. What Article 10 to 5 actually says.
Why so many people see it as this fundamental moral contract.
Exactly. And the challenges it's facing, like that proposed Texas bill we heard about, and also internal talks at NAR itself.
Mm-hmm. And we also want to bring in the perspective of a really vocal advocate on this, Patrick Harris.
Okay, so let's lay the groundwork first. What is Article 10 to 5?
Well, it sits within Article 10 of the NAR Code of Ethics. In Article 10, that's all about non-discrimination.
Okay, and the core requirement?
It's pretty explicit. It says, realtors shall not deny equal professional services based on protected characteristics.
So that includes race, color, religion, sex, disability, familial status, national origin.
Sexual orientation or gender identity, yes. And it also covers discrimination in membership for, professional real estate groups, too.
Got it. And then there's Standard of Practice 10 to 5. How does that fit in?
That adds another layer. Standard of Practice 10 to 5 specifically prohibits realtors from using harassing speech, hate speech, epithets, or slurs.
Based on those same protected classes we just listed.
Exactly.
So why does this specific part of the code seem to carry so much weight? You mentioned the phrase moral contract.
Yeah, because that's genuinely how many view it. It's not just seen as another rule in a big book.
More like a commitment.
Precisely. A commitment realtors make. The idea is when you choose to join NAR, you're essentially accepting this code, Article 10 and 10 to 5 included, as a kind of, moral obligation.
And upholding it isn't just about avoiding, getting fined or something.
Right. No, it's much deeper. It touches on fundamental equality, respect for clients, respect for colleagues.
It's about making sure the realtor brand means something trustworthy, right? Integrity, not just closing a deal.
Absolutely. And someone who really embodies that fight for what this article stands for is Patrick Harris.
Right, you mentioned him. He's a realtor with ERA Crossroads Realty in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
That's him. A top producing realtor, actually. And he's become a really recognized voice, particularly on fair housing and LGBTQ plus rights within the industry.
And he's got the credentials to back it up. Named Midwest Realtor of the Year by the LGBTQ Real Estate Connection twice, 2021 and 2022.
That's right. And he also got an advocacy award from the Prism Real Estate Alliance for his work trying to strengthen fair housing protections in Indiana more recently.
So he's clearly active. Member of the Indiana Association of Realtors, the Upstate Alliance, listed in the LGBTQ plus Real Estate Alliance directory, too.
Definitely involved.
What really struck me from the materials you shared was his directness. Seems quite vocal.
Oh, he is. Doesn't shy away from difficult conversations. And interestingly, also known as a really sharp negotiator.
That's an interesting mix.
It is. And when it comes to people violating Article 10 to 5, his stance is, incredibly clear.
Which is?
He basically says he has zero sympathy. None.
Zero sympathy. Wow. There's a quote here, isn't there? They chose to break the rules, and now they have to face the consequences.
Yeah, that really sums up his perspective.
What does that tell us about how advocates like him view this code?
It tells us it's not just a guideline you might accidentally, bump up against. It's seen as a conscious commitment.
So choosing to violate it is like a fundamental breach of trust.
Exactly, a breach of that moral contract we talked about. And for people like Harris, accountability is absolutely essential to maintain the profession's integrity. Non-negotiable.
Okay, now, whenever codes involving speech come up, inevitably the First Amendment gets brought into the discussion. Patrick Harris addresses this, right?
He does, and his point is pretty crucial. He stresses that the First Amendment protects your speech from punishment by the government.
Ah, the government. That's the key distinction.
Yes, it does not shield you from consequences if you violate the standards of a private organization you chose to join.
Like NAR?
Exactly like NAR. NAR is a private association. It's voluntary. So it has the right to set its own ethical codes for its members. Codes that uphold fairness, respect, non-discrimination.
And if you join, you agree to play by those rules.
That's the deal, essentially.
This whole distinction became really relevant with that situation in Texas, didn't it? Senate Bill 2713.
It really did. That bill aimed to basically force professional trade groups,
Like NAR or state association?
Yes, forced them to accept members regardless of their speech. It was an attempt to limit their ability to enforce their own ethical standards around conduct.
But it didn't pass?
No, it was defeated in the Texas House just last week. Failed to advance before the legislative session ended.
Okay. And for those who support strong ethical codes like 10 to 5, that outcome is seen as what?
As a pretty significant win, a sort of reaffirmation that professional associations do have the right, and maybe even the responsibility, to set and enforce standards. Standards that protect the public and maintain trust in the profession.
But the pressure isn't just external from legislatures. NAR itself is apparently looking at possible changes to Article 10 to 5 internally.
That's what the sources suggest, yes. There are discussions happening.
About what kind of changes?
Things like trying to clarify what exactly counts as harassment, and also maybe restricting the enforcement of standard of practice 10 to 5 so it only applies during professional activities.
Okay, that sounds potentially significant. The professional activities part especially.
And this is where Patrick Harris and others too are raising some serious red flags.
What's the main concern?
Well, there's a worry that trying to clarify harassment might end up narrowing the definition too much, making it harder to address certain behaviors. But the bigger concern for many seems to be limiting enforcement just to professional activities. The fear is that could really weaken the code's overall effectiveness.
Harris has a pretty punchy line about that, doesn't he? Something about hate not clocking out.
Yeah, he says simply, hate doesn't clock out at 5 p.m.
And the point behind that is?
The point is that discriminatory attitudes or hateful speech aren't confined to, office hours or during a specific transaction.
Right. A realtor's conduct outside of a formal setting can still impact their reputation, client trust, the whole profession's image.
Absolutely. So the argument is, if you let that kind of behavior slide just because it happens, say, on social media after hours or not during a showing, you're sending a really damaging message. It creates a potential loophole.
And this whole discussion, these potential changes, they're raising broader questions about NAR leadership, too.
They are. Concerns are being voiced about sort of the moral compass of the current leadership as these debates happen and head towards potential board votes.
The feeling being that leadership needs to stand firm on these principles.
That seems to be the crux of it. The perspective is that if the leadership of the country's largest real estate trade group doesn't seem absolutely solid on defending these core non-discrimination principles,
it could erode trust.
Exactly. Trust from its own members, and maybe more critically, trust from the diverse communities that realtors are supposed to serve fairly.
So really, it all comes back to trust, doesn't it? Defending the integrity of Article 10 to 5 and the standard of practice 10 to 5.
It entirely circles back to trust. The trust clients need to have that their realtor will represent them fairly, ethically.
And the trust members need to have in their own professional organization that it really stands for the highest ethical standards.
It underscores that whole idea that fair housing and equal service, they aren't just buzzwords or, lines in a marketing brochure.
For ethical realtors, it has to be a lived commitment in words and actions.
Precisely. So we've kind of walked through what Article 10 to 5 and the standard of practice require, why they're seen as this vital moral contract.
Right. Looked at that Texas legislative fight and its outcome and these ongoing internal NAR discussions.
And heard the perspective from advocates like Patrick Harris about why upholding these standards without watering them down is so critical.
Because ultimately, sticking to these ethical codes isn't just bureaucratic box ticking. It feels absolutely fundamental to the integrity of real estate as a profession.
And fundamental to the trust that you, whether you're a client or just part of the community, place in realtors.
So maybe a final thought for you to consider, building on all this. How much do the standards set by a private group like NAR actually shape public perception and trust?
And what's the individual realtor's role, their sort of ongoing responsibility in actively living up to those standards in every single interaction, whether it feels strictly professional or maybe falls into that gray area outside the 9 to 5?